Stop the cameras. The words cut through the studio like a knife. Dr. Phil McGraw, a man who had hosted thousands of episodes without breaking stride, stood frozen in the center of his stage, holding a white envelope in his trembling hand. The audience, mid-applause just seconds earlier, fell into complete silence. Production assistants exchanged confused glances. The woman in the guest chair covered her face with both hands, her shoulders shaking. And in the wings, partially hidden behind a curtain, an elderly nurse with silver hair pressed her palm against her chest as if trying to keep her heart from bursting through. No one in that studio, not the cameras, not the crew, not even Dr. Phil himself, was prepared for what was about to happen. Because what started as a routine episode about adoption searches was about to become something else entirely. Something that would change 3 lives forever and leave everyone watching barely able to breathe. This is the story of a reunion 30 years in the making. A story of a baby left in a hospital nursery, a nurse who couldn't let go, and the moment Dr. Phil realized he wasn't just hosting a show anymore. He was witnessing a miracle. It was a Tuesday morning when Sarah Mitchell walked into the Dr. Phil studio. She was 32 years old, a high school teacher from Ohio, with kind brown eyes and a quiet nervousness that made her twist her wedding ring around her finger as she waited backstage. She had applied to be on the show 6 months earlier, filling out the standard questionnaire. "What's your story? Why do you need Dr. Phil's help?" Her answer had been simple but devastating. "I was adopted as an infant. I have no medical history, no baby photos, no connection to where I came from. I just want to find the person who held me first. The nurse who was there when I was born. I want to say thank you." The producers had done their homework. They always did. What they found was a trail of hospital records, adoption agency files, and a name that kept appearing in the margins of Sarah's birth documentation. Nurse Margaret nodded, unable to speak, and Sarah reached for her hand. Dr. Phil looked directly into the camera, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Sometimes the people who save us aren't the ones who stay. They're the ones who loved us enough to let us go." He glanced at the 2 women, still holding hands, still crying, still processing. "And sometimes, if we're very lucky, we get to say thank you." The studio erupted in applause, but Dr. Phil raised his hand, stopping them. "Before we end today, I want to make one more thing clear." He looked at Margaret and Sarah. "This doesn't have to end here. You have each other's contact information. You have time. You have answers. And most importantly, you have each other." Sarah turned to Margaret, her voice trembling but certain. "Can I call you?" Margaret smiled through her tears, squeezing Sarah's hand. "Every single day if you want." Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. Dr. Phil stepped back, letting them embrace one final time as the camera slowly pulled away. The episode ended not with words, but with the image of 2 women holding each other, a photograph between them, and a bracelet glinting in the studio lights. A moment 30 years in the making. A reunion that proves some bonds, once formed, can never truly be broken. And as the credits rolled, Dr. Phil stood at the edge of the stage, his arms crossed, watching them. He didn't move until they finally let go. Because he knew, as everyone in that studio knew, that what they had just witnessed wasn't television. It was healing. It was grace. It was proof that sometimes, against all odds, love finds its way home. Calloway. The same nurse who had worked the night shift at St. Mary's Hospital in Cleveland on March 14, 1993, the night Sarah was born. The same nurse who, according to hospital logs, had spent an unusual amount of time in the nursery that week. The same nurse who had written in her shift notes, in handwriting that betrayed emotion. "Baby girl, 7 pounds 3 ounces. No name yet. Someone will love you." But what the producers discovered next, what they quietly placed in a sealed envelope and handed to Dr. Phil just minutes before the show, would turn everything upside down. The episode began normally enough. Dr. Phil walked onto the stage to his usual applause, greeted the audience with his signature confidence, and took his seat across from Sarah. The conversation started where it always did, with context. "Sarah, thank you for being here. Dr. Phil began, leaning forward slightly the way he did when he wanted someone to feel heard. Tell me why this search matters so much to you. Sarah took a breath, steadying herself. I had a wonderful childhood. My adoptive parents loved me completely. But there's always been this hole. I don't know my medical history. I don't know if I have siblings. I don't even know what I looked like as a baby because there are no pictures from my first 3 months of life. Her voice cracked slightly. I just want to find the nurse who was there. Who held me. Who wrote that note in my file. I want to thank her for caring when no one else did. Dr. Phil nodded slowly, his expression serious. You deserve those answers, Sarah. And we've been working with our team to try and track down this nurse. He glanced briefly toward the wings, where a producer gave him a subtle signal. Her name is Margaret Calloway. And we found her. The audience gasped. Sarah's eyes went wide. You found her? We did. Dr. Phil's voice was steady, but there was something beneath it. Something careful. She's here. Backstage. She wanted to meet you. Sarah stood up so quickly she almost knocked over her chair. Tears were already streaming down her face. She's here? Right now? She is. Dr. Phil stood as well, and that's when his entire demeanor shifted. He looked toward the camera crew, then back at Sarah, and then he did something he almost never did. He paused. He looked down at the envelope in his hand, the one the producer had given him before the show, and his jaw tightened. When he looked back up, his eyes were different. Glassy. Heavy with something the audience couldn't yet name. Sarah, he said quietly, before we bring her out, I need to tell you something. Something we just learned. Something I didn't even know until 20 minutes ago. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. The studio went completely silent. Sarah froze, her face a mix of confusion and hope and fear all at once. Dr. Phil looked at the envelope again, then at the audience, then back at Sarah. When our team tracked down Margaret Calloway, they asked her about the night you were born. And she remembered you. She remembered everything. She told them she worked the night shift that week because the nursery was understaffed. She said your birth mother was very young, very scared, and left the hospital within hours of delivering you. No name. No family. Nothing. Sarah nodded, wiping her eyes. I knew that part. It's in my adoption file. Right, Dr. Phil said. But what's not in your adoption file is what happened next. He opened the envelope slowly, pulling out a single piece of paper. His hands, normally so steady, were shaking slightly. Margaret told our producers that she stayed with you every night that week. She fed you, rocked you, changed you. She said she couldn't stop thinking about the fact that you had no one. He paused, his voice dropping lower. And on the third night, after her shift ended, she went to her supervisor and asked if she could take you home. The audience collectively inhaled. Sarah's legs seemed to buckle, and she sat back down hard, staring at Dr. Phil with an expression that could only be described as shock. She asked to adopt you, Sarah? The words hung in the air like smoke. Sarah opened her mouth but no sound came out. Dr. Phil continued, his voice thick now, fighting to stay composed. She filled out the paperwork. She went through the interviews. She was approved. But at the last minute, another couple, your adoptive parents, were prioritized because they had been on the waiting list longer. Margaret was told she'd have to wait for the next child. So she let you go. She signed off. She went back to work. He stopped, his throat working to swallow. But she never forgot you. She kept a photo of you from the nursery in her wallet for 30 years. Dr. Phil paused mid-sentence. The studio went completely silent. He looked at the paper in his hand, then at Sarah, whose face was streaked with tears and frozen in disbelief. And then Dr. Phil did something no one expected. He set the envelope down on his chair, walked to the edge of the stage, and looked directly at the camera. I need everyone to understand what we're about to do here, he said, his voice raw and unfiltered in a way his audience had rarely heard. This isn't just a reunion. This is a woman meeting the person who fought to raise her. The person who wanted to be her mother but couldn't. That's not a guest appearance. That's sacred. He turned to the producer standing near the curtain. Bring Margaret out. But do it slowly. Give them space. He walked back to Sarah, who was now sobbing openly, and he did something else he rarely did. He knelt beside her chair, putting one hand on her shoulder. You okay? He asked quietly, off mic but still audible in the silent studio. Sarah shook her head, laughing through tears. I don't know. I don't know what I'm feeling. That's okay, Dr. Phil said gently. You don't have to know. Just feel it. And then the curtain parted. Margaret Calloway stepped onto the stage, and the moment she saw Sarah, her composure shattered. She was 68 years old, small and slight with silver hair pulled back neatly, wearing a soft lavender cardigan and a white blouse. Her hands immediately flew to her mouth, and she stopped walking, frozen 3 feet from the chair where Sarah sat. Oh my God! Margaret whispered, her voice breaking. Oh my God, look at you! Sarah stood, her legs shaking, and for a moment neither of them moved. They just stared at each other, two people connected by a moment in time that neither had ever forgotten. And then Sarah broke. She rushed forward, closing the space between them, and wrapped her arms around Margaret so tightly it was as if she were afraid the older woman might disappear. Margaret sobbed into Sarah's shoulder, her small frame shaking with the kind of grief and joy that only comes from decades of holding something in. I'm sorry, she kept saying, over and over. I'm so sorry I couldn't keep you. I tried. I tried so hard. I know, Sarah whispered back, her own voice choked with tears. I know you did. Thank you. Thank you for trying. The audience was on its feet, many of them openly crying. Dr. Phil stood off to the side, his arms crossed, his head slightly bowed, and when the camera briefly cut to him, it was clear he was struggling to hold himself together. He wiped his eyes quickly, almost angrily, as if frustrated with his own emotion, and then he looked back at the two women still holding each other in the center of the stage. Off camera, Dr. Phil made a choice no producer expected. He walked over to his chair, picked up the envelope, and returned to where Sarah and Margaret stood, still embracing. He waited until they finally pulled apart, both women wiping their eyes and laughing through the tears, and then he held up the envelope. Margaret, he said gently, there's something else I want to give you. Something I think you've earned. Margaret looked at him, confused. What do you mean? Dr. Phil opened the envelope and pulled out a small photograph, faded and creased from age. He held it up so both women could see. It was a Polaroid of a tiny baby wrapped in a hospital blanket, eyes closed, one small fist curled near her face. Written on the back in neat handwriting were the words, My girl. March 17, 1993. This, Dr. Phil said, his voice steady now but heavy with meaning, is the photo you kept in your wallet for 30 years. The one you told our producers about. They asked if they could borrow it to confirm some details. But I'm giving it back to you now. Because it belongs to both of you. Margaret's hands trembled as she took the photo, and she held it up next to Sarah's face, comparing the newborn in the picture to the woman standing beside her. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. You still have the same little nose, she said, laughing softly. The same little frown when you're concentrating. Sarah took the photo from her, staring at it as if seeing herself for the first time. I've never had a baby picture, she whispered. Not one. And you kept this? For me? I kept it for me, Margaret admitted, her voice breaking again. Because I needed to remember that you were real. That you were mine, even if just for a little while. Dr. Phil stepped back, letting them have the moment, and he gestured to the crew to stop filming. The cameras kept rolling, but the tone shifted. This was no longer a show. It was a private moment being witnessed by millions. Margaret reached into her cardigan pocket and pulled out something small and silver. It was a bracelet, delicate and worn, with a single charm in the shape of a baby booty. I bought this the day I applied to adopt you, she said, holding it out to Sarah. I was going to give it to you on your first birthday. But… She trailed off, unable to finish. Sarah took the bracelet with shaking hands and immediately put it on, clasping it around her wrist. I'll never take it off, she said fiercely. Never. But what happened next is something no one in the room, or watching at home, saw coming. Dr. Phil, who had been standing quietly to the side, stepped forward again. His face was serious, his jaw set in that way it did when he was about to say something important. He looked at Sarah, then at Margaret, and then he addressed the audience directly. I want to make something very clear, he said, his voice calm but firm. What we just witnessed isn't closure. It's a beginning. Margaret didn't just meet Sarah today. She reconnected with someone she's carried in her heart for 3 decades. And Sarah didn't just meet a nurse. She met someone who loved her before love even had a name. He paused, letting that sink in. Now, I don't do this often, but I'm going to step outside my role as host for a second and speak as someone who's spent his career studying human behavior. He turned to Sarah. You said earlier that you had a hole? That something was missing. And I'm guessing that today didn't fill that hole completely. Because the truth is, you're going to have questions. About your birth mother. About why she left. About what happened after. And those are questions Margaret can't answer. He looked at Margaret. And you, Margaret, have been carrying guilt for 30 years. Guilt that you didn't fight harder. Guilt that you let her go. But I need you to hear me when I say this. You did everything you could. You loved her when she had no one. And that matters.